They were the greatest ships of their time, three grand ocean liners, born from an ambitious dream to conquer the seas. The Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic, each designed to be the pinnacle of luxury and safety, were meant to rule the Atlantic. But instead, history remembers them for tragedy. One sailed on through wars and storms, another met its fate in the icy Atlantic, and the last, swallowed by war before it could ever fulfill its purpose. But few people realize Titanic was not the only ship to sink. What really happened to these three sisters? And did White Star Line's most ambitious creations carry a curse? Before we unravel this mystery, be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible journeys into history. The early 20th century was a golden age for ocean liners. Ships were no longer just a means of transportation. They were symbols of power, prestige, and human ingenuity. The White Star Line, a company in fierce competition with the Cunard Line, sought to outdo its rivals with a new class of ships that would redefine luxury. In 1908, the decision was made. 3 Olympic-class liners would be built at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, Ireland. Their names, Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. They were the largest ships the world had ever seen. Over 882 feet long, with 15 bulkheads, state-of-the-art watertight compartments, and extravagant interiors that mirrored the grandeur of the world's finest hotels. First-class passengers dined in elegant dining halls, walked marble-floored corridors, and relaxed in smoking lounges reserved for society's elite. And yet, despite their titanic ambitions, disaster lurked beneath the waves. Our journey begins with the Olympic, the lucky one, the first of the trio, RMS Olympic, launched in 1910. She was a magnificent sight, carrying thousands across the Atlantic, a true symbol of British engineering. But she was also the first to encounter danger. In September 1911, while sailing near Southampton, the Olympic collided with the HMS Hawke, a British warship. The impact tore a massive hole in her hull, twisting steel and ripping open 2 compartments. But unlike her sister Titanic, Olympic's design saved her from sinking. The ship limped back to port, heavily damaged but still afloat. Many saw this as a stroke of luck, but others whispered that the Olympic-class liners were cursed. Little did they know, far greater tragedies were yet to come. Titanic, the night that changed history. April 10th, 1912. The RMS Titanic, the grandest ship ever built, embarked on her maiden voyage from Southampton, England. She was a marvel of engineering, a floating city on the sea. The wealthiest passengers walked her decks, sipping fine champagne, while immigrants, hopeful for a new life in America, packed the lower cabins. Each soul aboard carried dreams of the future, but fate had other plans. A perfect night, or so it seemed. By April 14th, the Titanic had been sailing for 4 days. The weather was calm, the sea like glass, so still that some crew members remarked it was unnerving. But beneath that serene surface lurked an invisible danger. Warnings had already been received, at least 6 iceberg alerts from other ships. But Titanic, racing toward New York at full speed, continued on her course. The ship's captain, Edward Smith, a man with 40 years of sailing experience, was confident. After all, Titanic was unsinkable, or so they believed. But then, at 11:40 p.m., disaster struck. A nightmare unfolds. The lookout, Frederick Fleet, was the first to see it, a massive iceberg, appearing like a ghostly mountain in the dark. "Iceberg, right ahead!" The officers reacted instantly. Hard to starboard, the ship turned, but it was too late. The iceberg grazed the hull, tearing open a 300-foot gash along its side. Below decks, chaos erupted as freezing seawater poured into the lower compartments. The Titanic's fate was sealed within minutes, though few knew it yet. Denial and delay, precious minutes lost. At first, few believed anything was wrong. Titanic was built to withstand a catastrophe. Some passengers even laughed when they were asked to wear life jackets. Even Captain Smith, in the early moments, remained calm, hesitant to cause unnecessary panic. Engineer Thomas Andrews, studying the damage, face turning pale. But Thomas Andrews, Titanic's chief designer, knew the truth. The ship was sinking, and fast. He rushed to warn Captain Smith. The Titanic had less than 2 hours to live. Distress rockets were fired into the sky. The wireless operators sent the first ever SOS message in history. "Come at once. We have struck an iceberg, sinking fast." But there was one fatal flaw. There were not enough lifeboats. Titanic carried 2,224 souls that night, but lifeboats, only enough for 1,178 people, just a fraction of those on board. To make matters worse, in the confusion, many lifeboats were lowered half empty. Women and children first. Some lifeboats left with just 12 people when they could have held 65. In the chaos, third-class passengers were trapped behind barriers, struggling to reach the decks. While first-class passengers were guided to safety, many steerage passengers were left behind, some never even knowing the ship was sinking until it was too late. The unsinkable ship breaks apart. By 2 a.m., Titanic's bow was almost fully submerged. Passengers clung to the stern, trapped by freezing waters. Then, the unthinkable happened. The ship's structure gave way. A loud, thunderous crack echoed across the Atlantic as Titanic's stern snapped away from the bow. Witnesses reported the ship rose into the air before plunging downward. Then, silence. It was like a black hole swallowing her whole. Jack Thayer, survivor. For the 1,500 souls still on board, the frigid waters became their tomb. Survivors in the lifeboats could only watch in horror as Titanic vanished beneath the waves. But the horror wasn't over. The survivors, packed in lifeboats, were left to drift for hours. Those in the water, hundreds of men, women, and children, succumbed to the freezing temperatures within minutes. Some lifeboats refused to turn back, fearing they would be swamped by desperate swimmers. The cries for help slowly faded, until there was nothing left but silence. By dawn, the RMS Carpathia arrived, pulling the lucky few from the lifeboats. The world awoke to news of the greatest maritime disaster in history. In the weeks that followed, investigations were held, new maritime safety laws were passed, and Titanic became a symbol of both human ambition and human error. But for those who lived through that night, the memory never faded. I will never forget the screams, the worst sound I ever heard, and the worst part was knowing we could do nothing. Eva Hart, Titanic survivor. Today, Titanic remains a haunting reminder of that tragic night. Over a century later, her wreck lies in the darkness, slowly being consumed by the sea. But her story lives on. Was this tragedy preventable? Did arrogance seal Titanic's fate before she ever set sail? What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. And if you love history, be sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the past. There is no doubt the Titanic had left an undeniable scar on maritime history. The world demanded answers. Investigations were held, safety regulations were rewritten, and new standards were put in place to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. But the White Star Line was not finished. There was still one more sister, a final attempt to correct the mistakes of the past. She would be bigger, stronger, and safer than Titanic. But even with all the improvements, fate was not finished with the Olympic-class liners. Britannic, what really happened? By 1914, the third and final sister, HMHS Britannic, was ready to take her place as the most advanced ocean liner ever built. At 903 feet, she was even larger than Titanic and fitted with more safety features, extra lifeboats, double-hulled reinforcements, and taller bulkheads designed to withstand severe damage. In every way, she was built to be unsinkable, just like her ill-fated sister. But Britannic would never carry a single paying passenger. The world had changed, and so had her destiny. Before she could set sail as a luxury liner, war erupted across Europe. World War I had begun, and the British government needed every available resource. Britannic was no longer a passenger vessel. She was transformed into a floating hospital, ferrying wounded soldiers from the battlefields back to England. Her gleaming white hull was painted with giant red crosses, a clear signal that she was a non-combatant. Protected under the Geneva Convention, she was not to be targeted. For nearly a year, she sailed through the Mediterranean, treating soldiers wounded from the brutal battles of Gallipoli. Thousands owed their lives to her medical teams. She became known as the Angel of the Mediterranean. But even angels cannot escape fate. Then disaster strikes. The morning of November 21st, 1916, was clear and peaceful. Britannic, now an experienced hospital ship, was on another routine voyage. But at 8:12 a.m., without warning, a sudden deafening explosion echoes. Britannic shakes violently, chaos erupts on deck. A massive explosion tore through her hull. The ship lurched to one side, metal twisted, debris flew through the air. Panic swept the decks. Water rushed into the lower compartments at an alarming rate. Some say it was a German mine, lurking beneath the waves, placed to sink enemy ships. Others whisper it may have been a torpedo attack, a violation of war laws. To this day, no one is certain what truly caused the explosion. The fight was on to survive. Britannic was designed to be unsinkable, but the explosion had been too severe. Unlike Titanic, her watertight compartments were breached immediately. Water poured in, flooding the boiler rooms, knocking out power, and sealing her fate. Unlike her sister, Britannic had one advantage: time to react. The crew acted fast, immediately launching lifeboats. But a new danger arose. Britannic was sinking bow first, just like Titanic. But as she went down, her propellers, still spinning, created a deadly vortex, pulling lifeboats into their crushing blades. One survivor said, "I saw the lifeboat ahead of us being sucked in, and in seconds it was gone. We barely escaped with our lives." Violet Jessop, Britannic survivor. Yes, the same Violet Jessop who survived Titanic and Olympics near disaster. The final moments. It was a race against time. At 8:57 a.m., just 55 minutes after the explosion, Britannic was gone. Unlike Titanic, where chaos and inexperience led to the deaths of over 1,500 people, Britannic's crew was better prepared. Of the 1,066 people aboard, only 30 perished, a fraction compared to Titanic's disaster. But Britannic, the last of her line, would never sail again. The legacy of the lost sisters. 3 sisters, 3 different fates. The Olympic, the survivor, served her time before retirement. The Titanic, the legend, became the most famous shipwreck in history. And the Britannic, the forgotten one, still rests beneath the sea, one of the largest sunken ships in the world. For decades, divers have explored her remains, uncovering the secrets of her final moments. But to this day, mystery lingers over her sinking. Was it truly a mine, or something more sinister? The Olympic-class liners were built to be invincible, but in the end, they were no match for the sea. Here is an interesting fact. At the time of Britannic's service, the reigning monarch of the United Kingdom was King George V. It was under his rule that the ship was officially designated His Majesty's Hospital Ship Britannic, a title given to vessels serving the British government in wartime. Instead of carrying the wealthy elite across the Atlantic as RMS Britannic, she was repainted in stark white with red crosses, a symbol of mercy under the Geneva Convention. No longer a vessel of leisure, she now served as a lifeline for thousands of wounded soldiers, sailing under the protection of the British Crown. Britannic was never given the chance to host wealthy travellers or immigrant families dreaming of a new life. And yet, for all her improvements, for all the lessons learned from Titanic's sinking, she too was lost to the sea. A ship designed for opulence, swallowed by war. What do you think? Was Britannic's sinking just another tragedy of war, or was she doomed from the start? Let us know in the comments below. For decades after her sinking, Britannic remained lost beneath the waves, untouched by human hands. Unlike Titanic, whose location was unknown for decades, Britannic's wreck was discovered much sooner, in 1975, by famed ocean explorer Jacques Cousteau. Resting in the Aegean Sea at a depth of 400 feet, 120 meters, Britannic is far more accessible than Titanic, which lies more than 12,000 feet below the Atlantic. Despite this, few have explored her wreck in detail. Unlike Titanic, which was torn in half by immense pressure, Britannic's hull is largely intact, offering researchers a haunting glimpse into a ship that was once a beacon of hope. Over the years, deep-sea explorers have mapped Britannic's remains, uncovering frozen moments in time, rusting corridors, decayed medical wards, and lifeboat davits still frozen in place, as if waiting for passengers who would never come. Today, she is a protected war grave, a silent monument to those who perished that day. Comparing the 3 sisters, what went wrong? So, how did these 3 legendary ships compare, and why did only one survive? Olympic, the oldest of the 3, launched in 1910, survived for 24 years, earning the nickname Old Reliable after safely carrying thousands of passengers and serving in World War I as a troop transport. Titanic, the most infamous, launched in 1912, sank on her maiden voyage after colliding with an iceberg, leading to the loss of 1,500 lives. she is now the most famous shipwreck in history. Britannic, the youngest, launched in 1914, equipped with improved safety features, but ultimately sank in just 55 minutes, likely after striking a mine during World War I. Unlike Titanic, she had a much lower death toll, just 30 casualties, thanks to improved evacuation procedures. One sailed on, one became legend, and one was lost to war. Together, they represent the triumph and tragedy of human ambition. But even today, questions remain. Did Britannic really strike a mine? Or was there something more sinister at play? Some theories suggest that the explosion was too powerful for a simple mine, leading to speculation that she may have been deliberately targeted by a German U-boat. However, no records have ever confirmed a torpedo strike. Others believe an accidental internal explosion may have caused the disaster, perhaps a malfunction in the boiler room or an unnoticed structural flaw. With the wreck resting in relatively shallow waters, experts continue to study Britannic's remains, hoping to uncover the final clues about her tragic end. But one thing is certain, like her sister Titanic, she met a fate no one expected. Today, the Titanic, Olympic, and Britannic remain three of the most famous ships ever built. Their stories remind us of the power of the ocean, the limits of human engineering, and the cost of overconfidence. If you love uncovering the mysteries of history, don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the past. Until next time, may your journeys be safe and your waters calm.